that I think that point is a good springboard to kind of talk about the times in which we're living in, and how it seems, at least for so many, perhaps myself included, that it can just be so like next to impossible to really get in the heads of those people that we see on the other side of our looking glasses, our smartphones, and to really see what is driving them to say such things. How do they see the world? And then reconciling that there's the plurality of viewpoints and making some productive use of them. Like we are in your I think in your piece on the coronavirus, you write that we're in an epistemic crisis, and I think we've been in one for a while. It's just that the coronavirus has really made it abundantly clear, and that it's not just the layman who may be right or wrong, but it's those that are by institutions described as experts, those that really should be the ones who are saying this is right and this is wrong. And the emperor is obviously wearing no clothes because we can just see that what they're saying is nonsense. Like the WHO saying like you should not wear masks, for instance. And you're right that expertise is who and how and the pandemic makes this obvious. So perhaps you can just talk about what you were kind of saying there, and this. What's your take on the epistemic crisis? And maybe we can come to a way out of it. But just describe the situation that we're in from your perspective, because I'm really curious to hear about it.
Yeah, well, somebody that I have followed and read a lot of and listened to all of his available lectures online, and was lucky enough to have I've interviewed actually 3 times over the years, twice before I started Future Fossils, and then once on Future Fossils podcast, is the historian, poet, and mythographer William Irwin Thompson, who left his position at MIT in the 70s. He called himself an atheist at the Vatican because like some of his earliest writings were extremely critical of this technocratic, elitist, globalist approach that was developed there, and espoused elsewhere at like the Club of Rome and some of these places, and really has shaped the world that we live in today. A sense of being able to use a systems view for social and ecological engineering is far from what I would call a humble approach to the mystery of our reality. And so he left and he started this transdisciplinary think tank for the immanentization of planetary culture called the Lindisfarne Association. And I'll send you a link to the collected Lindisfarne tapes, which are up on the E.F. Schumacher Center for New Economics website, which I binged while on tour, on festival tour across the U.S. in 2013. It was just like all I listened to all summer. And in those tapes, he talks about how we are moving out of, he looks at like major world ages in the history of civilization. And he says, actually, right now we're moving out of this, the kind of Newtonian worldview and into a chaos and complexity worldview, what he called a chaotic dynamical world age that's defined less by the trade of ideas through maritime commerce and more through the trade of identities in a world wed to itself through electronic communication. And so he saw in the 1970s and a coming age of increasing, he's very early to the tip as far as
70s prescient.
Well, he that was around the same time that The Limits to Growth came out, I think 1972, and he was writing some of his early work At the Edge of History in I think came out in 73, so like very much stewing in the same worldview where he was talking to, some of these people like Lynn Margulis, who was the biologist that changed our understanding of evolution, the modern complex cell being a symbiotic collaboration between different bacteria. He was working with Stuart Kaufman, who was at the Santa Fe Institute and worked on self-organization and the origins of life. He was working with Paolo Soleri, the visionary architect who studied under Frank Lloyd Wright and then went on to build Arco Santi, which was this sort of visionary project in Arizona that was a sort of post-car, you know, atavistic in a way reclamation of the human scale. And so anyway, this is the point, is that he was working with all of these people who were looking at history and evolution and natural history through this multi-scale lens. You know, that was actually around, I think, the same time Power of 10 came out in 1974, that film that zooms in and out from the subatomic level out to the size of the whole universe and then back. And so this kind of thinking around, also Stuart Brand was a part of this organization. You know, Stuart who founded Long Now, the Long Now Foundation, which I'm also affiliated with out of, you know, some amazing serendipity. Stuart was the guy who wrote the petition to the United States government to get the first images of Earth from space declassified, because he believed that being able to look at the entire blue marble of our planet would be a transformative event for humans, would be, you know, the image, the dominant symbol of the 20th century, you know, the most profound and transformative thing. And he was right. Like, we're looking at, you know, a movement, part of this, you know, my friends who are like scholars of indigenous wisdom, like my friend Violet Luxton in California, talks about, you know, the difference between the sort of Western mental approach and the indigenous approach, in which, you know, we think of time, you know, in a kind of like linear way in the West, and then time and the cosmos are understood as, you know, contained within like the medicine wheel, the sacred hoop, you know, by most indigenous peoples. And so, at any rate, that's kind of a tangent. But the point is that Bill Thompson and a lot of these people that he was thinking with were thinking about the scale at which we exist. And, you know, one of the things that has happened is that, you know, the modern era and the you know, the first two industrial revolutions really moved us out of a human scale world, you know, a world where we're surrounded by things that, you know, are kind of like we evolved to be surrounded by, you know, farm animals, this kind of thing, you know, living in villages of, you know, Dunbar number or sub Dunbar number people. You know, we can remember all the people that we see on a regular basis. We have relationships, intimate relationships with them. And the shift to urban life, and urban life as dependent on these massive systems that we cannot see, basically, you know, what Timothy Morton calls hyperobjects, you know, like the electrical grid, you know, which we can't perceive it all at once, you know. We can only catch like flickers, you know, intimations of it, the way that like a cell can only sort of, you know, intuit the body that it lives within. You know, we've moved out of this age where things make sense to your average human being, and into an age where it's almost better that we characterize the postmodern world, what Bill Thompson called the meta-industrial civilization, as one that, you know, is navigated more like the pre-modern demon-haunted world that Carl Sagan was writing about. You know, where it's beyond our ability to actually effectively wield the tools of rationality that we developed over the last 400 years to address things, because it's not a Newtonian system. It's not linear and orderly, and you know, cause and effect don't work in this, like, you know, intuitive way. It's like there's all these second, third, fourth order consequences. There's like, you know, all of these things that, you know, how many degrees out can you think about all of the factors that have caused a situation, you know? And so like our brains have largely been tuned to develop easy narratives, you know, to assign kind of local, you know, personified blame or like a responsibility. You know, we look for charismatic leaders. We want to put our faith in the president, even when we shouldn't. like, and not just the president, but,
A
people,
person.
leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone. We want someone to hold our hand through the insanity, the turbulence, the chaos and metamorphosis that we're living through, and it's just not appropriate anymore. And so we're at a really difficult moment because this is a these kind of things can be taught. This kind of learning, it's like writing. It's like you can learn to write as an adult. It's just harder. And the kids that are growing up now as digital natives are going to have a much easier time navigating the complexities of the world that we live in, but they will still be subject to the same cognitive and attentional biases that we suffer from, because those things are kind of baked into us evolutionarily. By which I mean, we tend to develop what SFI external professor Mazarin Banaji has called implicit biases. Basically like stereotypes that we don't realize that we're carrying around and acting on, because it's easier for us to not treat every single situation we encounter as a novel situation, to have to like treat it as unique. And so we develop these rules about the world, and mostly we don't even realize that we've done this. And even those of us who think, oh, I'm a very fair humanist kind of person, I'm not a racist. Well, the psychological evidence suggests that you don't actually have any control over this, because if you're exposed to racist stereotypes, they still affect the way that you are subconsciously processing information. Say, you run into someone in a dark alley, or you're engaging with someone on social media only, with only their profile picture to go off of. And like, especially in time compressed encounters where you don't have a lot of time to like sit down and break bread with somebody and get to know them, we rely more and more on our stereotypes, on our shorthands. And so the faster the world asks us to run in order to keep pace with things, the more likely we are to treat one another unfairly, simply because, we're not taking the time. And then also, the same is true. I go into much more detail about this in a podcast I recorded with comedian Shane Moss, who has this amazing show called Here We Are. We had a conversation called Science versus Human Nature, where we like went into detail about all these biases. But like one of them is that we have like a local information gathering bias, where it's better, like generally speaking, it's more important that we are in alignment with the friends and coworkers and family members upon whom we socially depend, than it is that we're in alignment with whatever objective reality is. I mean, there are obviously plenty of counterexamples, but like when it comes to political elections, SFI professor Mirta Galasic, with whom I had a great conversation on Complexity podcast, some of her work looked at how you actually get, and this is to your point about like expertise is who you know, and like what kind of history you've had and so on, that she found that you can poll people and ask them who they're going to vote for in an election, but the results that you're going to get are less accurate than if you ask them who they think their friends are going to vote for. Because ultimately on the day before the election, a lot of people flip the script because they realize that they would rather not argue for the next 4 years with everyone they know, and that it's just easier to like toe the line and vote the way you think all your friends and family are going to vote. And that this kind of thinking is going on all the time. So like people, another piece of research that she did was on how people of privilege tend to believe that everyone in the world has the same privilege because those are the people they're hanging out with, and then they're projecting that local reality onto everybody else. And so this is not actually just about financial privilege. Like if you're happily married, you assume that more people are happily married than actually are. And it's equally true in the opposite direction. It's equally true that if life is just shitting on you, then you're going to think that that more people are suffering in the way that you are suffering. And you see this all the time with people that are like, this is like a suicide hotline thing, right? Like that you're having a hard life, so you just assume that the world is horrible. You don't trust other people's happiness. You don't see it as an invitation into a separate state of consciousness, and so there's this thing about, well, the fact is, if you, because of the mathematics of any kind of privilege, if you're actually you're equally biased but more likely to be right statistically if you assume that other people are suffering in the way that you suffer. But but it's just one of these things where it's like, we basically are looking for all of these shorthands. We project, our reality onto everyone else's reality. And, we have, because of the media ecosystem in which we live, we have been funneled into an even narrower field of attention than we're capable of, and even more reactive and inflammatory discourse than we're capable of. And so, we are in a really tough spot where we have to work against the entropic currents that, of our sort of technosphere and its wants and the institutional agencies that we're sort of embedded in, and say, like, no, I'm taking a stand, like Doug Rushkoff with his Team Human podcasts. He's like, no, I'm not going to do what Google wants me to do. Like, the people inside Google don't even want Google to do what Google wants them to do. I mean, I'm lucky enough to know a ton of people inside Google, and they're all great people. None of them are like, ha, 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 like, you will be assimilated. They're all trying to turn this ship around from the inside, which is extraordinary hard work. And that's that's the work that we're being called to do right now, I think, is to say, look, the economies of scale that have favored efficiency and convenience over the last 300 years have hollowed out all of the messy, creative possibility that makes being a human not only rich and wonderful and rewarding, but also robust and anti-fragile to the kinds of changes that we're facing as a society. We absolutely need to restore this mesocosmic layer, the layer of, like, neighborhoods and, worship groups and, like, book clubs and all of the things that the coronavirus has attacked. It's like it's forcing us to sever from the vestigial human communities that we've been keeping, to realize that they have been withered to a vestige, and that it's time to start nourishing that stuff actively again, because we need to recenter things a little bit. The centrifuge of history has gotten us focused on global and, like, microscopic, and we need to bring back this human scale. So that's really, I don't know if that's a direct answer to your question. I think I answered like five other questions.
No, but it's great. It's great.
End rant.